Hello, everybody. Happy Earth Day to all of you, and welcome to this online event towards a well-being economy that serves people and nature. We're here today to launch a documentary and a new report as part of our campaign for the transformation of our economic system. I hope that many of you have been with us just now to watch the 25% revolution. Both the documentary and our new report expose the destructive social and environmental impacts of the current economic system, and both of them propose an alternative blueprint for a fairer economy that operates within the natural boundaries of our planet. My name is Patricia Heidegger. I work for the European Environmental Bureau, the EEB. We are Europe's largest federation of environmental citizens organizations, and I'm very happy to moderate today's event. We will hear from two of the authors of the report and as well from the renowned economist and creator of the doughnut economy, Kate Raworth. Before we start, let me explain some of the housekeeping rules. So this is a Zoom webinar. Only our panelists will be able to unmute themselves and speak. However, we really want you to be actively engaged in the discussions. So half of today's 1 hour debate is dedicated to your questions and comments. So please do use the Q&A function to put questions to the panelists. What is very important, please identify yourselves with your name and organization on Zoom. Keep your questions in the Q&A box short and precise, and do indicate to whom you're asking a question. We'll have to delete any lengthy or diffuse comments filling up the Q&A or any personal attacks. So get ready, we're looking forward to your questions. Now, the 25% revolution is an initiative by the Belgian NGO Broederlijk Delen, which the EB supported with our colleague Nick Maynen providing an interview, and we ensured versions in 11 additional languages to be able to distribute the documentary more widely. We would like to thank our member organization Katapa, who has volunteered to create the subtitles for 6 languages. Our new report towards a well-being economy that serves people and nature that we want to discuss with you today is part of EB's and Oxfam's work on the transformation of the economic system. It's been authored by the EB's Kati Wiese and Nick Maynen and Oxfam's Barbara Senholz-Weinhardt. A big thank you to the 3 of you for your very hard work and dedication, but also to all the other colleagues in our organizations and networks who have contributed. We'd also like to thank our funders, the MAVA Foundation, as well as the European Commission's DEAR program in support of our project Climate of Change. Climate of Change is a network of 16 organizations across Europe, through which we seek to raise awareness on the interconnections between climate change, migration, and the need to transform our economy. We want to empower and encourage especially young people to advocate and campaign for change. Climate of Change is launching its EU-wide campaign today with this report at its core. And we have also released the results of a major opinion poll on the attitudes of young Europeans towards climate change. And we are launching a petition demanding EU policymakers to set in motion reforms that will safeguard a healthy and sustainable tomorrow. We're now sharing the links with you through the chat. Okay, let's jump right into the discussion of the documentary and the report. I'd like to start with Nick Maynen, who is a Senior Policy Officer for Economic Transition at the EB, and he's one of the authors of the report. Nick, at the EB, you've been advocating for the transition to a new economic model that allows us to ensure human well-being while staying within planetary boundaries. One of the core messages of our work has been that our economic model must stop aiming at infinitive economic growth. It must stop depending on continuous expansion. Only a few years ago, questioning the growth model was disparaged as madness. This has changed in the political discourse, or what is your take on that?
Well, it sure has changed. The president of Ireland now says that degrowth remains the only sustainable strategy for planetary survival. I don't know if he was inspired by the vast academic universe that we call the degrowth community, or maybe he read Growth Without Economic Growth by the EEA, an official EU agency that measures the state of the environment, or the OECD report Beyond Growth. Either way, the discourse seems to change in some places, at least, indeed. And at the EB, we've been pushing for this by building up the evidence, the narrative, the solutions. For example, in 2018, we plastered a post-growth lobby letter from thought leaders like Kate in media all over Europe and turned it also into a popular petition that we gave to Vice President Frans Timmermans. In 2019, we also published and promoted the still influential Decoupling Debunked report. And in 2020, my colleague Kate Raworth teamed up with European Youth Forum and Tim Jackson to write about the work, how work can work in an economy that doesn't grow. And so now we have this documentary and a new report together with Oxfam. Look, we know that trying to solve our environmental problems without trying to fix the fundamental flaws in our economic system is as if we are trying to dry a wet floor with a towel while the tap is still open. And for a too long period in time, politicians, corporations, and unfortunately, a lot of people and even NGOs just embrace this comfortable lie that we can green grow our way out of this planetary mess. But this has only brought us deeper into the swamp. In this comfortable green growth myth, we would simply swap our energy sources to renewables and forget about the mining of finite materials. Or we would simply stick to that 10% of the world economy that we now call the circular economy. But you can't make the whole economy circular if the pipeline that the global economy actually is just far too thick to bend into a circle. So in order to be serious about making the economy circular, you need to be serious about doughnut economy, well-being economy, economy for the common good, and degrowth. Enter development NGOs like Broederlijk Delen, who came with this great systemic change documentary project that we simply joined. Enter increased willingness among NGOs and even, I think, majority of Europeans to embrace the inconvenient truth about our economy. First, we need to recognize that the house is on fire, and then we need to look at what needs to be done about it. So in a massive EU-wide poll, a majority said that more needs to be done to protect the environment, even if it comes at the expense of growth. We are mentally ready for this, but we need to translate this into concrete policy alternatives. And of course, bottom-up pressure towards the powers that be. And we specialize in the first part, but we can and should all do some of the last part, I think. And from my years of lobby work on systemic change, I know that several people in positions of power really want bigger change. They see the comet that is coming at us. The president of Ireland is not just a lonely guy shouting in the desert. What we do is helping those who want systemic change in NGOs, in administrations, in governments, to get their colleagues on board. And as the title of the documentary already indicates, scientific experiments have proven that you only need 25% in a group to unite behind a common, a clear, and a sound argument to convince the majority and tilt the balance. So let me end just with why I think this is so timely, aside from today being Earth Day. Well, vast amounts of money are being spent by governments in the coming months and years, amounts unimaginable just a year ago. And this is a once in a lifetime year in a way. Are we going to subsidize the next pandemic by pouring billions into economic activities and structures that lead to more deforestation and thus viruses? Or will we use it to build a new economy, one that doesn't burn out people and the planet? I think I've never been so afraid and hopeful at the same time, because it feels like the whole pandemic has brought our struggle for systemic change to DEFCON 1, like highest level. I'm alarmed when I look at the damage done by macho authoritarian leaders who are behind most of the COVID mass graves, or by recovery money being used for new highways or gas projects. But on the other hand, who would have thought just a year ago that the IMF, the Economist, would declare neoliberalism more or less dead, that Trump was replaced by a Biden that seems to feel burned? I certainly also see openings on the EU political scene too, with the review of the economic governance framework, the conference on the future of Europe, ongoing torpedoing of the EU-Mercosur trade deal, the million of Europeans who signed a petition for the EU to leave this energy charter treaty, and a wider revision of all EU trade policy. There are opportunities ahead of us. Having the EU's Green Deal survive the storm and be referred to as a growth strategy can maybe be seen as a good thing if it implies that there is no longer an economic growth strategy on the side that undermines everything else. But there's a whole lot of work to be done to define this and see it reflected in a vast array of old paradigm arrangements, such as the Stability and Growth Pact, or trading as a goal in itself instead of a means to a bigger goal. You won't see us on an aircraft carrier with a big banner of mission accomplished in the background anytime soon, well, for a couple of reasons. But I wasn't planning, and neither of us was planning on retiring soon anyway. So without further ado, let's hear from Barbara about how, together with Oxfam and EEB, we've investigated and described the root causes of the mess we are in, and listen to some hints as to what we propose to do about it all. And then, of course, let's hear also from Kate how her much better donut economy model comes to life all over Europe.
Thanks a lot, Nick, for sharing your insight where we come from with this debate at the political level, and also referring to a lot of things that are currently on the political agenda. So correct, let's go to Barbara. Dr. Barbara Senholz-Weinhardt. She's a senior policy advisor for economy and globalization with Oxfam in Germany, one of the 3 authors of the report. So Barbara, tell us more about how our report relates to what we've seen in the documentary, The 25% Revolution.
Yeah, thank you. So the report fleshes out the things that we've seen in the documentary. Many aspects on extraction and growth, on economic and political inequality, on global north and global south, on movements and change, on pioneers in particular sectors. And the report wants to provide a conceptual overview and key arguments, as well as providing the studies, the facts and the figures that put flesh on the bone and make the argument stronger. So to what degree do we overstep planetary boundaries? What kind of violations of human rights and workers' rights are well documented all over the world? To what degree and through which means do the rich and those that are powerful contribute to environmental destruction and other problems that we see? So for example, if we take the example of the climate emergency, the report fleshes out that the richest 10% of the world population were responsible for over half of cumulative carbon emissions between 1990 and 2015. So these kinds of important aspects. And I would also like to share one slide that really motivates me in the work that we do, which is this one of the donut of the EU 28. So the figures are from when the UK were still within. And what you can see with one glance is that overall the European economy is transgressing planetary boundaries by several factors, all but one, and it's not even meeting its own social objectives, not according to the donut, which is an international absolute minimum threshold, but also not according to its own social aims. And wherever we look, each and every EU economy, but also globally, none, according to these figures, manages to be in the donut. They're either below the social threshold or transgressing planetary boundaries, or both. And this really encapsulates in one point the message. We are failing, the global economy is failing. And what we want to focus on in the report is to also see, why is this happening? Why is it so difficult to get into the donut? What does actually stand in the way of change, and why do we see the picture we see? And therefore we identify these 3 root causes: our addiction to growth, and we spoke about that already. And secondly, our ability as Europeans to let others pay the price for our mode of production and consumption through the way the global economy is still structured since colonial times. And thirdly, the vicious cycle of economic inequality and political power. So to put it very bluntly in one sentence, the rich making the rules, making them even richer, and the vicious cycle continues. And this is one of the main aims of the report, because those in power and those that are happy with the status quo can very easily keep us busy fiddling with symptoms and getting us caught up in lots of minor struggles. And it's in order to be able to really go for real change, we need to see through that and set our own agenda by focusing on root causes.
Thanks a lot, Barbara, for this introduction to the report. So does the report then come with all the solutions of how we in the EU can get into the donut?
The report is a compass. It's not a finished roadmap or an exhaustive list of policies needed, but something that can guide policymaking, but also activism for political change. It builds on the idea that transformation is not a quick and big change overnight, but a step-by-step change in the right direction. So each and every time that policymakers decide on a particular law, or that activists decide for what to mobilize and to fight, we can either cement the status quo, or we can contribute to its transformation. So our intention is that the analysis in this report helps to decide what is a priority, where do we need to put our attention and our focus, and where not. And if we look at policy proposals or projects that we look at, we can do this check. Does it reduce inequality or perpetuates it? Does it fuel our growth addiction, or does it help us to overcome it? And that way it helps to distinguish between quick fixes that in the long run aggravate the problems, and those policies or steps that have true transformative potential. So as one example, human rights and supply chains, which are now discussed at EU level. And this can either be done in a very kind of greenwashing way. So the CSR team in the end gets a slightly bigger budget and the reporting is a bit improved. Nothing particularly wrong, but also not helping a false solution. Or it can be done in a way that is really aiming to transform business models at the core, and to get them from being good at exploiting people to being good at making them thrive. And this is where the analysis of this report can help.
Great. And how does the report and its message kind of link to your overall campaigns and objectives at Oxfam, and kind of what motivates you to take up that struggle?
I'm most thrilled and motivated by the question of power and inequality and privilege. So the changes that we are proposing and the changes that are needed mean that some have to give up privileges and they have to give up power. And this is not won just by having a good argument or having the right facts and figures. This is a real struggle, and this is what relates to our work on inequality and power. And what we see is one of the root causes that I named, that the already rich and powerful can disproportionately influence political rules, and due to their influence, they are designed in a way that ensures that they get even richer and even more influential. And as most individuals have not attained their position because they have a good income, but because they own large corporations, corporate wealth and corporate influence and individual wealth and individual influence are very intimately linked. And I would also share one particular graph that you can also see in the summary. What we term the Medici vicious cycle, after the medieval Italian family, the Medici, that did exactly that. So through the influence that they have because they have dominant market positions, or simply because corporations and their owners have large sums of lobbying at hand, they can influence the laws that we see and the rules that we see. And then these rules, again, favor profit maximization and shareholder-driven business models. We see insufficient taxation, we see ineffective competition law, we see economic aid measures that are unconditional and not conditioned to sustainable transformation, and we definitely see an insufficient protection of human rights and of nature. And all of that means that it's contributing to social inequality, because it's raising the profits and the value of those that already have a lot, whereas the environmental destruction and the low wages hit those that are already living in poverty. And it also means, because it also affects taxation, that the state is actually lacking the money needed with good social services and infrastructure to equalize and to contribute to a more equal society. And this is where the particular focus lies of Oxfam's work and of my work, to see how we can rein into that vicious cycle, make it more visible, but also fight for the policies needed to break it up.
Thanks a lot, Barbara. So let's turn to our third guest, to Kate Raworth. Kate, you have described yourself as a renegade economist focused on making economics fit for 21st century realities. Well, I guess more or less everybody here present knows you as the creator of The Doughnut, of Social and Planetary Boundaries, and your book, Doughnut Economics, has been translated into more than 20 languages. You're also a senior associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute and a professor at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. So, Kate, we're very happy to have you here with us today. Both the 25% revolution and our report refer to the doughnut. You and your team from the Doughnut Economics Action Lab in Oxford, you have set up collaborations in different countries in the meantime. You're working with cities such as Amsterdam and Brussels. We've seen it in the documentary. Can you tell us a bit more about how you localize the doughnut economy at city level? So how does a theoretical concept translate into concrete policies and practices on the ground?
Sure, thank you. And it's a real delight to be here today on Earth Day. Congratulations for this report. And I love the really powerful 3 messages that Barbara just shared. Really powerful about overcoming our dependency on growth, recognizing the global North systematically exploits the global South, and overcoming this fabulous Medici vicious cycle. So really powerful messages. And I'm delighted to follow that. I'm going to share my screen because I want to share some images. Hang on one moment here. Sorry, why is that going on? Hang on. There we go. Okay, so yes, so starting with the doughnut, which I'm honored it features in the film and the report. We know where we are. We are in overshoot and shortfall. We are systematically outside of this. And to me, the generational challenge of our generation is to move from the system of red, overshoot and shortfall to moving back inside the doughnut. As Nick said, none of us are about to retire any moment soon. There's a lot of work to be done for generations. But to me, this is our generational challenge for which our children and grandchildren will rightly hold us to account. What did we do once that we knew? So as you asked me, Patricia, the question is, how can we bring this to the EU level? Barbara showed this fantastic EU graphic, but even to a national, even to a city level. A lot of action is starting at the scale of cities. That's where people seem to have a dynamism, a connection, a mobilization to start making things happen. So what happens if we just imagine cities where anybody is now, or a town, or a region, or a district? I invite everybody listening to think about the place where you are now and ask, can your city or place live within the doughnut? So let's unroll it and make some space to imagine the future that we want to create. So we move inside the doughnut between its social foundation and ecological ceiling. And we need to think about the people here where you are, but also your place's impact on the whole world, as Barbara just described so powerfully, the relations between places. And I'm going to talk about this through the lens of Amsterdam, which was the first city that we created this in. So the question we invite every city to ask itself is, how can your city be a home to thriving people in a thriving place, while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? This breaks into these 4 lenses. So the first question, how can all the people of Amsterdam thrive? All the people. Who are all the people in their full diversity of their histories and geographies and nationalities and age, gender, race, ethnicity? How can everybody be healthy, enabled with the means to have opportunity, connected in society, and empowered with voice and rights? And to follow what Barbara just said, what will some people need to give up in terms of their privilege and power to enable that everybody there can thrive? Then the question is, how can this city thrive within its natural habitat? Where is the place that you are located on planet Earth? At the top of a mountain, in a valley, in a wetland, in a desert, tropical zone, dry zone? What is nature's genius there? And how can your city be designed to work in a way that actually mimics nature's generosity? How can your city sequester carbon? How can it store groundwater? How can it cleanse the air and house biodiversity? So this is about the local ecology. And of course, every city is facing impacts of climate change. It's also about resilience to the impacts that we know are coming. So these 2 are the local aspirations of a place, to be thriving people in a thriving place. And traditionally, we've ranked and judged the world's cities merely on this. Oh, it's the most livable city in the world. But actually, some of the most livable cities in the world have huge global impacts. So we have to look at the global responsibilities of every place, asking how can your city respect the health of the whole planet? Amsterdam, like all cities in the global north, actually has a big red overshoot, like that European picture that Barbara just showed us. Massive overshoot on carbon, on footprint, on material footprint, on fertilizer use, water, land use, in terms of the clothing and the food and the electronics and consumer goods and construction materials imported daily into the city, and the stream of waste that goes out. How can these cities come back within their share of planetary boundaries? This is a profound transformation. And then thinking still of those supply chains of food and clothing, electronics and consumer goods, the people working in those supply chains who, as Barbara said through the report, have been exploited for decades, centuries through those global supply chains. What can cities do through their own procurement, or indeed through the purchases of the citizens and the residents and the companies that they give the right to do business in their city? What can be done to improve the conditions so that those supply chains respect the lives of all people? So local aspiration in the context of global responsibility. These are the four lenses, and imagine bringing this to your place. How would this unlock new conversations? Seeing a holistic perspective, recognizing the deep interconnections and some tensions, and bringing people out of their siloed perspective to work together holistically. This is what we did pre-COVID, as you can tell from the photos, in Portland, Philadelphia, and Amsterdam. These are city policymakers with some community members. So these were introduced by the city. And everybody in these meetings said, this is a relief to work holistically, to have a bigger, longer vision of our city. We worked with Amsterdam to produce their city portrait. They released it a year ago, April 2020, in the height of the city's COVID crisis. And we then quickly published the methodology of how we did it, because everything at Doughnut Economics Action Lab is open source and available for others to adapt and use. Within a couple of months, we saw initiatives taking off in cities and nations worldwide. And then I want to come to give you a few examples of those. So Brussels has been doing a fantastic project of bringing the doughnut to the region of Brussels, again, looking at it through these four lenses. You can look at their website, and on the 25th of May, they're having an event to really launch and share everything that's being created. And I really encourage anybody related to the city and region of Brussels to get involved in that project. In Devon in the UK, so not a city, a district, a county, they've mobilized to go on their own journey. They want to hold the People's Doughnut Assembly. They're looking at creating their own localized version of the doughnut. And this is the beauty of what's happening, is that the tool is very open by design. So anybody can take it and make it ours, make it make sense here. We're going to do it the way that works for us. That's what we absolutely intend. When Amsterdam, a group of change makers across private sector and education and community organizations and government and universities, they got together and created the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition, a group of residents of the place mobilizing themselves. This inspired groups to get together in so many places, in Malaysia and Australia and Barbados, in Ireland, in Hamburg, in Berlin, in Cambridge. It's popping up everywhere. And now these people have organized their own group of groups to listen and learn and support each other and learn together. So I know there may be people in this webinar today who are thinking, wow, that could be a useful tool where I am, where we are. What could we do to get involved? So if you're interested in downscaling the doughnut to where you are, first of all, I want to be really clear. You can integrate this into the organizations you're already in. I mean, it means a lot to me that Barbara in Oxfam is using the doughnut in Oxfam's work. I was sitting at my desk in Oxfam back in 2011 when I actually first drew the doughnut. You don't have to make a new organization. You can bring it into any organization's work. These are tools that should fit with multiple ways of thinking. We want to be part of a big movement. You can join the Deal community on our website, on our platform, become a member. Anyone can sign up and you can use all the tools, but let us know that you're there, because then you become part of the learning community. We ask everybody to follow the doughnut principles of practice, which you will find on that website. It says, if you want to use the doughnut, use it in a way that is aligned with the principles of coming into the doughnut, being regenerative, being distributive, nurturing human nature and aiming for the goal. Learn from the pioneers. There's a fantastic news story available on our platform that takes the story from 5 cities that have got community-based initiatives: Sydney, Berlin, Melbourne, Brussels, and Amsterdam. Really good to learn from how these cities and change makers in these cities are putting into practice, each in their own way. Get in touch with us through our contact form. Let us know that you're starting an initiative. We can put you in touch with others who are doing this. And our biggest request, and our one request, share back. We are making all of our tools and resources available. And in the spirit of reciprocity, we ask that everybody join the community and share back, because everyone is learning from everyone else. And I have to say, from my perspective, it's incredibly exciting and energizing to see what's popping up, people having ideas of things to do with these tools that we would never think of. Of course, it takes a million minds to come with a million brilliant ideas. So we ask that everyone shares back. So Doughnut Economics Action Lab exists because crazy change makers everywhere have wanted to play with a donut. Lots of people are afraid of economics, but nobody's afraid of donuts. So people are playing and engaging and making this a tool for transformation where they are. On our platform, you'll find tools and ideas and stories from change makers who put it into practice. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and I hope that gives a really clear introduction to anyone who wants to get involved. We hugely welcome you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kate. That's very kind of energizing and kind of good to see all these activities around the world and how people are getting engaged. So we're getting a lot of really interesting questions here. So thank you already to all of you who are putting down really precise and interesting questions. So we're trying to answer as many question as possible. So let me start with one question, or actually 2 that kind of are linked, that maybe Barbara can start to answer, and then the others feel free to come in. So we have one participant, Wanda, asking us, how can we actually stop business from creating demands and needs in the first place, which people probably don't have as such, but which we somehow believe in the past 70 years or so that we have. So what can we do to kind of stop from the creation of these demands? And what can we do that they prioritize more sustainable models, for instance, for repair, producing within planetary boundaries? And a linked question from Dita is that, what role does behavior change play in moving away from consumerism towards respect, reuse, etc.? Are there any good examples that we know of communication strategies that support such behavioral change? Barbara.
Thank you. There are many possible ways to answer that. I will pick one aspect that I find particularly convincing about the whole way corporations work, which is to change the way that we regulate what corporations are and what their purpose is. And at the moment, it's very much in the laws and the regulation that we created on corporate governance that they operate the way they operate, which is profit maximization. And this is actually something that at EU level is also worked at. And here, to me, if we go back to the question of power and who holds power, this is also about questioning who is actually exerting the power on corporate decision making, which is usually the owners and for normal publicly listed companies, the shareholders. And here we can talk about ways to make all stakeholders, not just shareholders, being able to have a say how corporations are run, and to make sure that other interests, society at large, nature, but also workers, suppliers, are reflected. And in a way, it's very strange that we came to a position where we think it's natural for corporations to strive for profit maximization. That is not natural at all. And it's not how corporations and their privileges, like limited liability, came about. In the very beginning, it was always obvious that they have to serve a public purpose for them to be allowed to be there. And this is, for me, the most important in-route at the moment in the current political climate. I'm not so much an expert on behavioral change, as this is often in the political discourses that I am in. This is often used as a way to divert attention away from policy solutions by saying people have to change. And I know that this question wasn't aiming at that. I'm just saying this is why it's not a particular focus of my work, but maybe others on the panel are better to talk about that. Okay, that's great. So she will take up, yeah, and on the question of debt and financialization, again, I would say this one input that I was talking about, regulating how corporations are run. This has also a lot to do with the fact that at the moment, investors are very, very much empowered to decide everything, and they are. Some are driven by impact investment, but many are driven by making money, so that we get used to a situation where it seems natural that you can make money out of money. And we really have to change our way we look at the economy and corporations to get back to the sense of, no, actually that is not a very convincing state of affairs.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, there was also one additional question from another participant who said, who wanted you to comment on the suggestion that corporate mandates should be changed by legislation so that they can no longer have profit maximization for shareholders as their core goal. So I guess in a way you already addressed that question. Did anyone else want to comment on the question on behavioral change? Nick, you're nodding.
I'm happy to jump in.
Okay, Kate.
Just to say, of course it matters. Of course it all matters, right? Everything matters. These are complex systems and solutions are going to come from multiple places. So how we behave and how we choose to travel and eat and what we think a decent holiday is, and how often we think we need to buy new clothes and change our mobile phones, it all matters. There's a fabulous website, actually, an initiative called takethejump.org that invites people who say, I have the privilege to give some stuff up. And I'm ready to see how I can challenge myself. So takethejump.org says, if you want to make your own life compatible with keeping global heating under 1.5 degrees, there are these 6 steps you can take. And it includes things like eating a plant-based diet, taking a long-haul flight only once every 7 or 8 years, only changing your electronics, mobile phone and laptop every 6 or 7 years, giving up private vehicles. And one of the 6 is to move the system, to recognize that, of course, it's not only about behavior change. One thing that we can all do is move the system. Move your money to a bank that gives a damn. Move your electricity account to a company that's actually committed to renewables. Move your pension to a fund that is serious about divesting and investing in renewables. Move your politics and engage in local politics. So we can also make that the system move, because of course we need system change. So I think it's both. And I think we mustn't let ourselves get caught in the either or, because we know that politicians rarely lead, they follow. And politicians will move to a more radical position when they can see that there is the 25% of people already standing there, ready to receive them in that space. So it's both.
Great, thanks a lot. Nick?
Yeah, I can maybe just add to that, as Barbara, we are not specialists in the behavior change part, because it's always a bit tricky as environmentalists. Before you know it, people think we are there with the finger to say what you shouldn't do, and then they use that against us. But I think what can be done by governments is lead by example. Green procurement, you have a massive influence on the market as a government. And leading by example also just works, is proven to work. People follow you if you take a first big step. Like Barbara, we are not in favor that much of like telling people what to do, but we are into the business of changing the policies, and there is a lot that can be done. Not just green public procurement, but also why don't you crack down on marketing for the bad and get active on marketing for the good? I mean, we do that for cigarettes, but we don't do that for fossil fuels. So much that we can do, and there are actually countries like Bhutan where they don't allow billboards or Lanzarote, they don't have billboards, these kind of things, to consume the worst products. So there's a lot that can be done, but we need to be bolder and convince governments to take bolder action and forget about this consumer is king narrative, because the consumer is king narrative is killing us all. It's not going to work. And I have to also admit, some corporations are also doing good things on that front. You have this indeed economy for the common good. They don't have this profit maximization as the key target. They are like looking into how can we contribute to common good. Or you have like choice editing happening in big corporations where they say we no longer sell these bad products, we only sell the good ones, even if it's more expensive. So on all fronts, whether it's corporation, a government, or a person, like Kate said, it's not a or story, it's an and story. And everywhere we just have to move forward where we can. And yeah, let's see where we end then.
Great, thanks. Let me take 2 questions here, which are more concretely related to Kate's presentation around the localization of the donut. So there's one comment from Max, who's saying that well-being economy, donut economies, that's great. But will they actually do the heavy lifting when it comes to the urgent and drastic changes we need, he's asking. He said, I'm afraid it will just be greenwashing. He's saying in Amsterdam, for example, the municipality's announcement did not really foster major change. And the donut-friendly or circular targets and initiatives have already existed before. So maybe Kate, you can comment a bit on that. And also there's another question from Sabine, who's saying, and how far can one bring the donut also to smaller communities, for instance, with 20,000 inhabitants or so, and how to encourage people there?
Great, thanks. On Max's point, look, anything can be greenwashed. There's a danger of anything getting captured by mainstream interests. We are setting up the donut in such a way, we've released it into the world as an open source concept that anyone can use, because I believe there are change makers everywhere. Some of them are inside the system and some of them are outside the system. Some of them are in business, in government, in communities, in education, and make tools available to them. Of course, things can get captured intentionally or unintentionally, watered down or misused or misunderstood. And this is the risk you take when you allow people to use something. The alternative is you close it and you set up tight regulations and you monitor everyone. I also think we don't have time to do that. We certainly don't have the capacity as a little organization to do that. So we've chosen to take this risk and to say, you know what, everybody can use it. And then it is to the citizens and the residents and the communities in each place to hold those using it and saying they're using it to account. So if in Amsterdam, if you think they're not using it, go lobby the government of Amsterdam and saying, you're saying you're doing the donut, you're not. It's your local conversation in Amsterdam, but actually they've used the donut in Amsterdam to create a circular strategy to draw up regulations for that city that are stricter and more ambitious than ones I've seen many places. They say we want to be 100% circular by 2050, 50% circular material use by 2030, 10% circularity in our city procurement in next year. And to me, that's a really powerful set of regulations that is now driving really clear conversations about circularity that I see and hear in Amsterdam that are completely absent in the city and country that I'm in, because we haven't laid down that regulation. So ideas can be captured. We think the way we think of it is the donut is a disruptive idea. And when business as usual meets a disruptive idea, something's going to get transformed. And we are working very hard to make sure that it's not the donut that gets transformed, it's business as usual. So the one place we have very clear regulations and limits is on the space of businesses using the donut. We say, companies, you are welcome to explore this tool. We've put on our website, actually, a tool for when business meets the donut, but you can only use it as an internal tool for reflection, because companies have an awful lot of internal reflection to do, especially the ones that Barbara's talking about that are publicly traded and profit maximizing. No company can use the donut in its publicity, in its website, in its branding, and businesses cannot lead this as a process until we have decided how to put in careful regulations down the line. I'd also say, you know, can the donut do the heavy lifting in time? I don't know. I don't think any of us know. The donut is definitely not the only initiative in the world. It's one, and it's being picked up by people who choose it. So we've never, ever once asked anybody to use it, to recommend it, talk about it, share it, promote it, never. The only people who are using it are change makers who say, we think this is a useful tool in bringing about the changes we want to make happen here. But it's part of a much bigger movement for change, Economy for the Common Good, Wellbeing Economies Alliance, the degrowth movement. None of us know if we're going to get there, do we? We're all putting our life's energy into trying to make this happen, and there are so many forces against us. So we do what we can and bring more ideas and bring more tools that can do this heavy lifting together. On Sabina's point, can this tool be used in smaller communities? Absolutely. In fact, I think small scale means there's a tight knitness and a strength of access to people working together. The downside, of course, of small communities is there's sometimes less regulatory power, less ability to set the regulation. So Amsterdam can change its rules on circularity. Can a small district within it? No. So there's always the question of who has the jurisdiction to change the rules that we need to change. But even Amsterdam is within the Netherlands, is within Europe, is within the world. So yes, absolutely, you can start at a smaller scale. And there are places on a very small scale. There's a neighborhood in the city of Birmingham in the UK where they are creating a neighborhood scale donut. Again, if you go on our platform and look them up, you'll see what they're doing to put it into practice.
Great, thanks a lot, Kate. And well, interesting fact, the most popular comment at the moment is, should we nominate Kate for the Nobel Prize for Economics? So on top of the list. Well, I'm taking the next question, who got most likes here. I think it's an interesting one from Gerrit Stegehuis. Maybe Barbara and both Nick, you want to comment on that one. He's asking, how can we best support people in the global south so they can take care of themselves instead of producing for us, cancel debts so that they do not just need to produce for export, question mark? Barbara, do you want to start?
Thank you. Very interesting aspect of the change needed. My first impulse would be to say, we don't need to help them. The best thing would if we stop doing harm. The do no harm principle is not fulfilled in the way that we set up the global economy or development cooperation. So in a way, it doesn't mean like stop doing anything, but to see that in a lot of cases, we stand in the way of improvements. Trade deals, and you can speak on length on that one, that have actually rules in them that prevent people from thriving. Or another aspect that we explore in the report will be land grabbing, where we are actually allowing, I mean, if I say we, that's a bit difficult to say, it's not only the EU, but as humankind, we have a trade structure that allows large corporations mainly to buy up land at the expense of those locals who have formerly used it. So there is this notion that people live in poverty and had no economic activity, and then luckily the Western corporations and investments came and created economic activity. And actually this is simply not the case. People were actively using the resources of their countries like water and land beforehand, and then they're stopped to do that and pushed into poverty. And I think this is the interesting aspect. But at the same time, I have to say, as somebody who also worked on very specific projects, for example, the Assam tea sector in India on workers' rights, that this is more easily said in the abstract than it's done in practice. Because if I now look at the very concrete project that we are involved in, you have these huge estates that produce tea for European and other markets in a very neo-colonial fashion, like literally the descendants of former forced labor under British colonial rule, now producing the tea that we consume at prices for which the sustainable production is not possible. And yet, obviously, the people that we work with, the partners that we work with in these countries, do not want us to stop import the tea because their livelihood depends on it and the current economic structure they're in. So the other aspect of this is, apart from us stopping to do harm, is also to do so in a way that is always, always, always spoken about first with the people that are affected, and not deciding on their behalf what's needed, but listening to them, what they think the next steps are. And sometimes for me, this is painful. Sometimes I think, no, but I don't want, I want radical change now. I don't want to buy it and I don't want to contribute to it. And I say, yeah, but we are not up for what you are proposing, because then I can't feed my family tomorrow. So this is also why this aspect of localizing it, that is so much ingrained in the cities, donut city work that Kate mentioned, is so important, right? Because unless we think it through what it means in very, very specific terms, it cannot really lead to good things.
Thanks a lot, Barbara. Nick, if you allow me, because we have another interesting question, which maybe you can answer, given that Barbara's answer was really extensive already. There's another quite popular question from Nicholas Fitzpatrick, who's saying, how can we better equip decision makers in institutions, which usually have a low turnover, and they're full of kind of mainstream economists whose toolbox for change is mostly limited to neoliberal market mechanisms? What can we do about equipping decision makers better when they take these decisions?
Well, if you want me to answer that one, by providing reports that we just wrote, by showing them documentaries that we just made, by making sure that they make well-informed decisions. And it's one thing to make them, but it's another to ensure that the message reaches them. And that depends from this bottom-up pressure that we talked about before, like through petitions, through actions, through all kind of events. And I'm convinced that you have people at the decision-making side You had, like, for example, an European Commission president in 1971, Sico Mansholt. He read the Limits to Growth report, and he suddenly became a degrowth activist as the president of the European Commission. These kind of people exist today as well in the Commission, but they need to really, like, win the debate with these good arguments that we need to deliver to them. So that's the job of us lobby organizations, is to bring the message to them. If I can just briefly come back on the previous, despite the great answer from Barbara, I think what we can do for the global south, I mean, stop making this EU-Mercosur trade deal, for example. This is a deal where Germans can export their cars and Brazilian agro-industrialists can export their cows to us, and at the expense of the people in Brazil and the local producers, the small peasant farmers. And that's the kind of things that we in Europe can stop these deals from taking place. There's a very intense fight on this particular trade deal with Brazil and a couple of other countries ongoing. So there are things that we can do in that sense. And the question also includes something on debt. Well, the last 5,000 years, there have been debt reshufflements, debt jubilees every 50 years or so. And the last one was in 1953. And with the pandemic creating a huge new debt, the question really becomes, especially in the EU, where most of the debt is internal, are we still going to pay back all that debt? With what? I mean, with economic growth? No, we can't afford the economic growth. So we can't afford to pay back the debt. And we need to have a proper discussion on that in the EU, which is a big discussion, but it needs to happen so that we are not longer trapped in this catch-21 situation of needing to grow to pay back the debt, not just in the EU, but globally. So that's a big debate, which I hope can take place, for example, in the Conference of Europe, that we are now going to have a big debate for 2 years on where the future of Europe will look like. That's maybe one avenue to discuss these big things. Sorry if it took too much time.
No worries. I'd also like to ask Kate, I mean, you are an economist. Maybe you also want to comment on the question, I mean, how can we kind of challenge, I mean, practically kind of these so well-established, let's say, mainstream economic ideas that seem to be so difficult to get rid of and that still kind of persist in these discussions? Maybe you can also share a bit of your experience here. And there's a question which is somehow related. There's Anna Maria who's asking, well, if we're failing, if politics are failing to address these environmental issues, do we have to, is it time to let the scientists and the technological experts decide on the transition? Would that be the right way forward? And then another participant, Maite, is saying, well, this can't be the right way forward. We have to strengthen participatory democracy, and we can't leave the decisions just to the technical experts. So Kate, from your experience, how do you react to these comments and questions?
Yeah, brilliant discussion. So first of all, when I wrote Doughnut Economics, I wanted to write economics for the 21st century, and I was writing it in mind was the students. Well, I was writing the book I wish I could have read when I was a student. So I was really thinking about the future policymakers, actually, the ones who are going to be the policymakers towards 2050. And it's outrageous that they are still being taught many of those old out-of-date ideas. So I was writing it for them. I very intentionally did not write it for politicians or governments, because I thought if I do that, I will write something that's very practical and reasonable and feasible and doable and incremental. And what is the point of doing that? There is so much out there already. So I just thought, forget it. What I write is going to just be off the page for them. It's going to make no sense. And what's been amazing is that since the book was published in 2017, I have been blown away by the number of political parties across the spectrum, by the number of civil servants, by ministries and departments within government saying, please come talk, we want to hear this. So it shows that one, the world is changing fast, but two, there are change makers inside governments, whether they're politically elected or whether they are civil servants, and they know that the tools around them are totally out of date. And then I want to pick up on the point someone made about why are we continually turning to the Economist? And I think it's a very important point. If economics is going to continue to be taught as welcome to economics, here is supply and demand, which puts price as the metric of concern at the center of our vision and tells us that anything that falls outside the price contract is an externality. This just is not fit for the 21st century. And I think if economists aren't going to evolve really fast, it is absolutely time. And we're seeing governments doing it already. They are listening more to the Earth system scientists. They are listening to other kinds of scientists, bringing in systems thinkers, sociologists, people who talk about power and privilege, which economists don't know how to talk about at all. So actually, I think the idea of the economist, if we go back to the ancient Greek, it means the art of household management. You do not do that through a supply and demand graph. You do it through a multidisciplinary team. You do it with the metrics of the earth and humanity. We're moving from the one number of GDP to a dashboard, which is captured in the donut in many, many other systems. So it's absolutely time for that old economic thinking to move over.
Thanks. Unfortunately, we're coming already to the end of our discussion, but there are still so many super interesting questions here in the Q&A. So let me just pick one last one that I think maybe all the three of you can very briefly comment on. I think it's something that's very close to our heart, which is very important to talk about. So there's a question from Victoria who says that behavioral change and the things that that the panel is discussing applies to a portion of the population who has the wealth and access to enjoy this lifestyle. How do we ensure that degrowth narratives take into account the needs of low-income individuals working in precarious jobs? Barbara, do you want to go first? Quick final comment.
The people on low incomes are the ones that are suffering the impact of our failed system. If I have a lot of money, I can afford to live in places that are not touched by environmental destruction, and I will not have the jobs where the workers' rights are violated. So if we want to act in the interest of those that are marginalized in society, if we talk to them what they need and wish for, and if we empower them to have a voice in what we design, I'm sure we get closer to the donut than we are right now.
I'll jump in. The center of the donut is all about the needs and interests of those who are living without. If we aren't addressing that, we're not in any way moving into the donut. And so that is the heart of this challenge. And as I said, when I was sharing the four lenses, one of the questions we have to ask is those with power and privilege, what must they give up in order for everybody to thrive?
Nick, final comment from your side?
Well, no, it's already well said. I mean, that's our job. It's working with governments so that they legislate in such a way that no one is left behind. And indeed, that's what's going to help them more than whatever we do on the behavior change side, in my humble opinion. So, yeah, it's the core of what we do is protecting people at the lower ends from all these malpractices that happen if you just let capitalism run a wild and uncontrolled, and then you have the law of the jungle, and then it's the weakest who suffer most.
Thanks, Nick. So yeah, there's still some more questions that we haven't been able to answer, and I'd like to thank all of you for asking these really interesting questions. Very, very good and very disciplined questions. Great. So we're coming to the end of our discussion here, and well, I guess what we've seen is that there is the understanding is growing that we need to end our fixation and dependency on economic growth and the infinite expansion of economic activities. And we've seen a lot of traction around concepts such as donut economics that promise that we as humans can actually thrive and grade and grow, but within these social and ecological boundaries. And as Nick and others have said, we are really at a crucial moment with political opportunities for transformative policies. But these need, of course, to be carried and pushed by a critical mass that we here altogether seek to mobilize. You have referred to one example that's on the political agenda this year. There's a real opportunity for us, for instance, to push for an obligation for all companies that operate on the European market to act with due diligence and to across their global supply chains and to avoid any negative human rights and environmental impact. And we have to make sure that these companies can then also be brought to the courts here in Europe, also by affected communities from the global south, which ties in with the discussion that we've just had. So we need these new legal paradigms to transform the economy, and there's a real opportunity for us to have an impact on these this year and in the coming years. There's other political opportunities. We've had interesting debates around, for instance, the Energy Charter treaties that really lock us in fossil fuel based economics. and that can kind of help us to overhaul the overall EU trade policy more generally. And there's other opportunities. The EU is reforming its economic governance. At the moment, the macroeconomic governance structures. It's reviewing the Stability and Growth Pact, which is so closely linked to GDP as GDP growth as its main target. Nick has mentioned the conference on the future of Europe, which is another opportunity for us as organized civil society, but of course also for individual people to contribute to the kind of joint vision for the future of Europe that we share. So I hope that you will leave the discussion and go back to our report and take some time to look into it and have a look at the other material that we have shared. Thanks a lot for joining us today. And you'll also be invited to join our next online event on the economic transition already next week on the 28th of April, more specifically on buildings in a world that looks beyond growth, with very interesting speakers on how to green our homes and public spaces. We're going to present another report on how to deliver a healthy, affordable, sustainable built environment for all. So I can only wish you a lovely rest of the day. And I'd like to finish with a quote by a French astrophysicist, Aurélien Barraud, who said that economic degrowth can be seen as immense intellectual, hedonistic, humanistic, and ecological growth. It's not at all a setback. So thanks a lot for joining, and hope to see you at one of our next events.
Thank you all. Bye.